A lot of people were celebrating last night, and understandably so. It does raise concerns, though, doesn't it, to be reopening things up, to be opening society and opening the economy at a time when we know this pretty dangerous variant is actually spreading in the country.
Well, look, that is why we are taking things one step at a time, taking things cautiously, if you like. We've done the next stage of reopening. The overall prevalence of the virus is now very low in this country. There are these hotspots, particularly around places like Bolton, where the variant that was first discovered in India has been detected. I know that Matt Hancock said that we've done some research into that variant. The vaccine does seem to be effective against it, but it does seem to have a higher transmission rate. And the greatest defence we've really got is to ensure that people continue to get their vaccinations, that we roll out that programme, that people in those areas who might have chosen not to get the vaccine so far do now get it.
Yeah, I mean, vaccine hesitancy actually within that area and amongst black and ethnic minority communities does seem to be pretty high at the moment. I think the uptake in one particular area affected by this variant is 37%, which is just not good enough, is it? How do you begin to really now tackle that hesitancy issue?
Well, we've been doing a lot in recent months to get those communities who are a bit more hesitant to engage with this programme to have the vaccine. I think maybe in those areas when they see the resurgence of the virus, it may prompt them to think, actually, this is serious, the vaccine is effective, it is preventing the spread of this in other areas, so now let's get it. And we just need to keep redoubling our efforts in some of those hard-to-reach communities to get them to see that having the vaccine for all of us is the best way out of this terrible pandemic.
Do we need more sort of voices from these affected communities to come up and speak, do we think?
Well, a lot of work is being done in those communities, and it has been, quite effective in getting uptake. But yes, there are still pockets where uptake is low, and there's no shortcut to this. We've just got to redouble our efforts to get community leaders, faith leaders in some of those BAME communities to really encourage people to come forward and have the vaccine.
Where are we in terms of the whole vaccine process? I know it's gone very well for the age groups that have been targeted so far, but this highlights, doesn't it, a need to get this process sped up to an extent.
Well, we've been running it at a phenomenal rate, to be honest. We now have close to 70% of the population have had their first jab, approaching now, I think 40% have even had their second jab. We've reduced now the timescale between those two from 12 weeks initially now down to 8 weeks so that we can speed up the rollout of that second jab, because we think that with this new variant discovered first in India, that there is additional protection, if you like, from that second jab, and the second jab becomes more important. So we're trying to condense those scales and get the second jabs out as soon as we can.
I was talking to Kwasi Kwarteng yesterday, and he was saying that it is, he thinks, still very likely that the next stage of lockdown easing, and with the full lifting of everything on June 21st, could still go ahead. I mean, are you as confident as the Business Secretary?
Well, we want it to go ahead. The whole plan about this...
Want it to, but...
of course, but we cannot rule anything out, and that is why the Prime Minister said we will take this a step at a time, as we have one set of easements, and just yesterday we've had a further set of easements, opened more parts of the economy. We need to see how that beds down over the next 2 to 3 weeks, and then shortly before the 21st of June, we'll be in a position to assess whether we can go to that next stage. We want to do that. That's always been the plan. We want each step to be an irreversible step, but we can never rule out that there may have to be a delay.
I mean, with that in mind, is the government actively looking at, fully opening on the 21st, whilst imposing, if necessary, local restrictions on areas that are still struggling? Is that an option?
That would be an option, and we cannot rule anything out, obviously, at this stage. But our preferred outcome is that we really double down and get the vaccination rates up in those areas that are seeing these problems, so that we can give them the immunity that they need to this virus, and then we won't have to have any such local lockdowns.
Now, again, talking to Kwasi Kwarteng yesterday, he wasn't particularly in favour of the idea that certainly in places like Bolton and Blackburn, they seem to be, should we say, bending the rules a little bit on who can be getting vaccinated, finding a reason to vaccinate anyone who wants to come forward. What's your view on that? Because if that is going to tackle the problem, and these are worrying hotspots, don't we just need to get as many people jabbed up as possible?
Well, we do need to get as many jabbed as possible, but also the advice that we have from the Joint Committee on Vaccinations, who advise us on this, is that if you divert effort to vaccinating very young cohorts, people in, say, their 20s, at the expense of vaccinating those in their 30s or 40s,
if they've got
you are risking them.
But if they've got the supplies, if they've locally got the supplies, it's not necessarily a bad thing, is it?
Well, I mean, there will be lots of already cases where if they've got supplies and they can do it, then they will push people through faster. But to have a conscious decision to say vaccinate the whole population in those areas, when actually there are still many people in the cohorts of 35 and above who've maybe not had the vaccine, the right thing to do is to get those over the age of 35 to have the vaccine, since it's the older you are, the more at risk you are.
I'm just intrigued. You say 35. My understanding is it's currently 36 at the moment. Is it dropping down to 35 today?
It's dropping regularly. I think.
Will it drop today?
I don't think it'll drop today, but it's but I don't know exactly what the update of the program. But it's moving. All I'd say is on almost a daily basis, moving down the age range.
Yeah. Look, can we talk about Brexit a little bit? I mean, we have to be very careful, don't we, about Brexit now that we've gone past all these hurdles. We have to be very careful, don't we, that any trade deals that we're now working on do not negatively impact groups in the UK. I mean, particularly that hugely important groups like the British farming sector.
Well, and that's always the case in all trade agreements. You go into these, we think there's great opportunities. We're very keen, for instance, to pursue trade agreements with Australia and also with the United States and with other countries as well. And but always in any trade agreement, yes, there's a balance to be struck between your commercial interests and your desire to open up free markets.
Is there a danger then with, for example, Australia, if there was a free trade deal, that would potentially negatively impact the British farming sector, wouldn't it?
Well, look, there are huge amounts of things that a country like Australia produces that are currently subject to tariffs, because that's what we had in the European Union, but where actually we're not even a producer and we can offer them tariff-free access in those areas. Everything from nectarines to almond nuts, where they're a big producer, and also, of course, wine.
What about the areas where we are a producer?
Well, it's a standard thing in any trade agreement that where you have what are called sensitive sectors, that's particular areas where there might be economic impacts to having a trade agreement. Well, there are well-established ways to manage that, where you can have what's called a tariff rate quota, or if you like, a tariff-free envelope at a set volume. So there's ways of dealing with all of these things.
But is it right that the International Trade Secretary is pushing for a zero tariff approach with Australia across the board?
Well, look, I'm not going to get into discussions that are going on in government about individual trade agreements.
You're not happy, though, are you?
No, in any discussion on any part of government policy, and trade agreements are no exception, there's a discussion and there's a consensus. And at the moment, there's a very clear consensus in government that we want to do a trade agreement with countries like Australia, but obviously on the right terms.
Is it fair to say, then, that you've had some robust discussions, as reported in the FT today?
I have very good discussions with all of my cabinet colleagues on all issues where we've got a shared agenda.
I think the smile says it all. That's a fair assessment, isn't it?
No, I mean, of course, in any discussion on any part of government policy, there will be issues where different government departments have a shared interest, and we obviously have a discussion in order to establish a consensus.
OK. Looking post-pandemic, how do we start to properly rebuild the economy? It's going to take a lot of work. How do we rebuild the economy and rebuild it greener?
Well, we've been setting out today, and I'm doing a big speech later today about nature and the environment. We want to put a much bigger focus on nature, so we are announcing a strategy on peat, which will include a ban on the sale and use of horticultural peat in garden centres, and a really big ambition to treble the amount of trees that we plant.